We're going to move into our final session of the day, starting with a keynote address from Peter Lucas-Jones. Peter Lucas is the CEO of Te Hiku Media, which is focused on encouraging people on their Māori language journey through content. And he's also the chairman of Te Whakaruruhau o Ngāi o Irirangi Māori, which is a network of 21 iwi radio stations promoting Māori language. He's the chairman of Te Rūnanga, sorry everyone, Te Rūnanga, nope, I am doing, it was all the ice cream. Te Rūnanga Nui o Te Aupōuri, not to mention he is also the deputy chair in his spare time of Māori TV. I will never complain about being busy again. He is a kaitiaki of iwi radio data and negotiates the responsibility of protecting data while leading the development of natural language processing tools for Te Reo Māori, which, if nothing else, would replace mispronunciations like my own. Please welcome to the stage the amazing Peter Lucas-Jones.
Kia ora, thank you. Tūno anara te puke I oromanga, tahuhu kahu ana ngā tae o te rae. Naura te ki nei puritia I te whenua, e kore puritia he whetu, kamo, e nui ake koe kei o mātua, e tuku ki te mate nā. Ka hakaroa hau kia rātou kua whetūrangitia. Nō reira e ngā mate, haere atu rā. Hoki mai kia tātou te hunga ora e pai nei I raro I te tuanui o tēnei whare o te papa, tēnā koutou. Ka whakahoki atu ngā mihi ki ngā iwi no rātou te mana o e nei whenua e tū nei tēnei whare. Nō reira ki ngā hau kāinga, ki ngā hapū, ki ngā iwi o tēnei takiwa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, thank you Jim for that introduction, springing me like that, for all the things that I'm involved with. But whānau, I must say it's an honour to be here amongst you today and to share a story about te reo irirangi Māori o te hiku o te ika, and our role as a haukainga broadcaster and a haukainga-based data science project that is led from a whānau hapu and iwi perspective. Kia ora mai anō tātou. My kōrero today is about data sovereignty and te kaitiakitanga o te reo Māori. And it goes without saying that our journey as iwi radio has been very much linked with the story of te tiriti o Waitangi. I'm not sure how many people are here today that might be from overseas, but welcome. And what I want to share with everybody is our view on te tiriti o Waitangi as an iwi broadcaster is that it is very much the founding document of Aotearoa New Zealand. And it's very much part of our history. And it's acknowledged, of course, from an iwi perspective, as enabling settler migration here to Aotearoa New Zealand. It's also closely associated with a senior document that is known as He Whakaputanga o te rangatiratanga o New Tirini. Now, when we think about our relationship with te tiriti o Waitangi, it also represents the story of repeated failures by the Crown to honour the promises that our tūpuna signed up to in 1814. And following the signing of te tiriti o Waitangi, we saw land alienation, language loss, cultural decline, and the marginalised of Māori people in their own homes, in their own territories, reduced to second-class citizens in their own country. And of course, the Māori language was banned in schools, and the punishment of our Māori children for language use in the learning environment had devastating effects on intergenerational transmission of te reo Māori. And in 1975, the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal represented dreams of hope. And of course, it also represented, aroha mai, the possibility of truth and reconciliation. No hea mātou, where do we come from? Te reo Irirangi o te Hiku o te Ika is from the very far north of New Zealand. So the very tip, the top tip of New Zealand. And there are 5 tribes from that area: Ngāti Kuri, te Aupōuri, Ngāi Takoto, Ngāti Kahu, and te Rarawa. And Jim mentioned that I'm also the chairman of our Rūnanga o te Aupōuri. If there's any iwi members in the room today, you'll know that we are going through a Rūnanga election at the moment. I'm a nomination, and I would love for you to vote for me. And so our license to broadcast as an iwi radio station is very much connected to the reason why we exist. And the reason why we exist is a response to language loss and language decline, which I mentioned earlier. And Māori language is the medium for the transmission of all things Māori. So if we are to consider te reo Māori as a vehicle, we are reminded that language springs from the life, landscape, and environment, and that te reo Māori is the only ideal vehicle for the transmission of the culture. And so our role is to promote Māori language and Māori culture, and we are a haukainga storytelling machine. Oh, taihua. This photograph will represent things to some people in different ways. And I wanted to put that photo in this presentation as a reminder of how far we've come, but also how far we have to go. Because I come from Te Taitokero, the very, very far north region of Aotearoa, and one of our senior kaumātua is well known for saying, "Kua roa tā tātou haere, kia kaua e haere tonu." We have come too far not to go further. He nui ngā mahi kua mahia, kia kaua e mahi tonu. And we have done too much not to do more. And when I look at that photo, it reminds me of that aphorism. So who is te reo Irirangi o te Hiku o te Ika? Our more popular name is Te Hiku Media. And we were formed in 1990, and we were born on the marae. There was a meeting at Pōtahi Marae in the late 1980s when our kuia and kaumātua got together and dreamed a dream that they would be able to turn the radio on and listen to current affairs, topical issues, and be entertained in te reo o te kāinga. And so following on from that, we benefited from the work that saw Y11, or the te reo Māori claim, positioned and heard. And of course, the 1994 Privy Council case regarding the sale of state-owned enterprises. It had far-reaching consequences for Māori language and broadcasting, and particularly from an iwi point of view. So iwi radio frequency licenses are for the purpose of promoting te reo Māori and culture, but something else that's really important too is our primary audience is a Māori audience. And I think that's important to recognise from a whānau hapu and iwi space, that the language learning journey is different for different people. And being Māori or being an Indigenous person and not being able to speak one's language can be a very traumatic affair. And so as iwi broadcasters, we recognize the difference in the learning journey. Now, some of you guys might be a little bit familiar with the fight for property rights for spectrum and the legal proceedings that different Māori groups initiated to secure Aboriginal and treaty rights for spectrum. Ngā kai whakapūmau must be mentioned because they secured the FM frequencies and the funding for iwi radio. And when we think about how closely they worked with the Māori Council, Ngā kai whakapūmau I te reo led efforts to secure a place for te reo Māori in broadcasting. Now, the government acknowledged Māori claims for spectrum only where te reo Māori was concerned, but they did not accept that spectrum was a taonga. Well, they haven't yet. And to appease Māori, the government offered some funding to promote Māori participation in the growing digital economy. Kahu was one of those funds, and Kahu was administered a few years ago, and we benefited from an award from Kahu to start work teaching computers how to speak Māori, and that was our first step into the data science and development field. But really important is Māori data sovereignty. Māori data sovereignty, it's about the protection of information and knowledge that concerns whānau and originates from whānau, concerns hapu and iwi and originates from hapu and iwi. And it recognises in its own way that Māori have rights to exercise decision-making over their data and their data ecosystems. And so I want to draw attention to Te Manararaunga and the work that Te Manararaunga do in raising awareness about Māori data sovereignty. Data is land. And I say that data is land because the thing about digital real estate is the people that benefit from it are the people that have benefited from the privatisation of land in Aotearoa first. And so if we are to think about what that might look like in the future, it could be a scary situation if we don't recognise the situation at the moment. And the reason I say that is because I've got all my notes here, o taihoa, that's my waiata and something I'm doing for kura reo. But what I want to draw to our attention is how important it is to recognise that data is important to Māori people. The way we store our data in our waiata, in our pepeha, in our tauparapara, in our whakatauki, is related to the landscape, is related to the maunga that we come from, it's related to our moana, it's related to our maramataka, it's related to that transitional period where our tupuna started to draw representations that were like this map, for example. So we've gone through a very long process of ensuring that we've found ways to store data. The waiata, the whakatauki, the tauparapara, karanga, whaikōrero, all these types, carvings, raranga, whakairo, all types of taonga record our data. I want to mention this because recently we started going through a digital transformation. And as part of that transformation, we had huge analog collections that many of our stations believed had a certain amount of tapu associated with those items for a range of different reasons those items were regarded as sacred. And so what we had to do was come to terms with the fact that 86% of our whānau hapu and iwi members do not live in our traditional rohe. And so how do we connect people with the place, the landscape, the culture, the language, when they are not part of the haukainga environment? So for us, that digital transformation also included the digitization of our collections, which are at least 30 years old. We held a meeting at our marae. Now, I don't know if you know much about marae meetings, but at marae meetings, sometimes you can get a handful of people, or you can have hundreds. And sometimes you need to use a little bit of cultural intelligence about getting people to come to the marae or engage in a particular kaupapa. We've always found the best way to get people to come is to tell them they are not allowed to come. You are not allowed at this hui. Absolutely not. And so our hui, we made our hui only for native speakers in te reo Māori, mo te hunga I pakeke mai I roto I te reo Māori o te haukainga. Kātahi ka haere mai te iwi. Ka haere mai te iwi. Ki te whakatika I a matu. And so at that hui, we had the opportunity to reconfirm our vision. He reo tuku iho, he reo ora. Living language transmitted intergenerationally is an interpretation. And our mission, whakatōkia poipoia kia mato te reo Māori o ngā haukainga o te hiku o te ika. And there was another motion that was moved and seconded by our elders, which was about the digitization of our analog collection, which was over 30 years old, and it was approved by the whare that we would work towards digitizing it and making it available, not to everyone and not everything to everyone, but layers, different layers of access. And so that was very important and a very big step for an iwi radio station. Hea rānei te kaitiakitanga. So what is it? Tiaki it means different things to different people, but it's most certainly a Māori value and most certainly a Māori principle. Tiaki, protect, guard, care for. Kaitiaki, to be a guardian, a custodian. There's no precise English translation, but these words perhaps help us to draw a picture of what kaitiakitanga means to Māori, taking on board, of course, that different whānau hapu and iwi may have their own interpretation of what it means for them, their space and their taonga. This is a photograph of my dad's mum, who was born in 1892, and her niece and our other whaia, and they used to love talking Māori on the radio all the time. And so when we think about these examples of native speakers and the world they come from, 1892, they were on Te One Roa Tohe and saw the first cars. They never had power. They cooked their kai on just totally different life they lived. And so what they wanted to tell were their stories about every maunga, about you don't pick leaves for rongoa in the nighttime, you only pick them in the morning, why you do this, why you don't cut flax at nighttime, So all their tikanga associated with their worldview and their philosophy, they wanted to pour in to the next generation. And these cassette tapes represent an effort to restore the connection between our generation and their generation. And so that gives us a little bit of an idea about why our whānau members see these things as sacred, considering that our parents were part of the generation that literally had the language beaten out of their mouths. So e hoki whakamuri kia ngā whakamua. You know, we got to look back sometimes and reflect to move forward. And that's what moving forward was for us. It was the establishment of our first digital platform, Hiku.nz, because it was a way for us to start broadcasting to all of our iwi members that were not in our terrestrial broadcasting area. We called it our big marae in the sky. And for us, it represented a place where debate could happen, ideas could be shared, stories could be told, whakaro could be challenged. So we've been corpus gathering in a range of different domains for more than 30 years, whether it's kapahaka, whether it's broadcasting at Waitangi on Waitangi Day for the last 30 years, Ngā Piringa Kōrero, the stories of our ancestors. Our cousin, she became a judge, so we live streamed that. Te reo te kāinga, looking at the idiomatic expressions, the idioms, the colloquialisms, all those sorts of things that we know exist and are the cornerstone of native speakers' communication in te reo Māori. After that, we decided to develop an app called the Whare Kōrero app. And an important part of this journey was to set out what the tikanga was of this whare. It wasn't just a name. Oh, no, no, no. It had a long whakapapa all the way back to Hawaii. And it was named by our late uncle, Tā heke nuku mai pūhipi, haere atu mātou ki koia, heke nuku mai ka mea atu mātou ki aia. He aha tētahi ingoa mo tō mātou taupānga. Kātahi ka whakahoki te kaumātua, Whare Kōrero. Aha kua haere koe ki Hawaii, kei kona anō te hale o lelo. I takea mai te whakaro nui i muri, i te Whare Kōrero, i ngā tūpuna, i ahu mai i Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki pāmāmau. These fellas should have got a translator. But what I want to draw our attention to is the kaitiakitanga license. Ko te manararaunga Māori te tāhuhu o tēnei whare. Ka noho te mana o ngā taonga kei tēnei whare ki ngā kaitiaki no rātou ngā taonga. Tiaki nei e nei taonga, kaua e takahi, kaua e poka noa. This whare upholds the principles of Māori data sovereignty. All content remains under the guardianship of the original distributor. Respect this whare and the kōrero within it. To learn more, you can access the kaitiakitanga license in the settings. You can download this app whānau and access your local iwi radio station so that it can become part of your Māori language learning journey. Whakapapa is such an important part of the work that we do, and it's the framework that we operate by to curate all our data. And it provides an opportunity for us to connect the user to the content. As I mentioned earlier, much of the content comes from our own whānau hapu and iwi. So when we work with the content, we have an intimate connection with it. And quality is such an important rule for us. It's a rule, it's a value, it's a principle. It's something that we care so much about because te reo Māori has experienced so much harm over the last 180 years. This is Tirei Niamu Kapa ni Kāka from Te Kao. and our patron passed away last year, but we had the opportunity to transcribe many interviews with our kuia and kaumātua. Tagging and labeling data was the first part of our journey. Tagging and labeling that data, for example, taputini. What did taputini mean? Tagging and labeling and describing the data in te reo o te kāinga. Being able to work through this sort of information, transcribe it, and then provide the necessary metadata required people that hadn't simply done a degree in te reo Māori or a master's degree. Oh no, this is a different type of mahi, this one. And you need the people that are homegrown, engaged, participating in the journey. And so this was how we worked closely with our kaumātua and kuia, having people going through our work with a red pen, ticking things with a red pen, big cross with another red pen, and to say that our teachers were our kuia and kaumātua was not only a blessing, it was an honour. But we couldn't transcribe all of the recordings. There just weren't enough people. Everybody else had a job, working in Wellington, working in Auckland, doing what they have to do for their whānau. And we knew and understood that we were going to have to try something else. So we started to teach computers how to speak Māori. We developed we developed this idea to have a competition. And it was basically reading sentences into your phone or your computer. We had a kaitiakitanga license for that as well. But, you've got to find a loser and a winner. And how do you find groups? Everyone had to be part of a group. You had to have at least 7 people in your rōpū. The whole language learning experience is a group experience. Think about te ātārangi, think about te arareo, think about the marae. It's an absolutely community-focused experience. And so we wanted to share that in the way that we captured data. Our kaitiakitanga license, that was very much about us being honest and straight up and transparent and accountable about what we were going to use the data for, and seeking permission before, not after. Showing that we thought people should opt out and giving them the option first, rather than simply thinking that everyone opts in by default. And it was a massive 10 days, and over 10 days we gathered 316 hours of tagged and labelled Māori language acoustic data. The biggest collection of Māori language data for teaching computers or natural language processing that I know of. And now it's way more than that, but in 10 days we wanted it to stop. We were like going, oh, why did you say 10 days? You should have said 7. And that's because everyone's like going, Peter Lucas? Now, I'm Mere's auntie. Now, Mere, she got told that her pronunciation wasn't correct with that word. I want to know, who was it that said Mere was wrong? Now, you ring me back, Peter Lucas. I'm going to come down to the office because I've had a kōrero with Mere. And so there's a really human relationship that working at iwi Radio has, and that accountability is very much connected with the trust that whānau have in us. Because if we get it wrong, we're going to be hit up at Pack and Save, we're going to be hit up down the streets, we're going to be hit up at the marae. And so I think that community accountability is really important and has inspired us in different ways in our journey. I want to talk about soft models a little bit, and this is because we know that whilst we've got something working, it's not perfect. And whilst we have developed Te Reo Māori ASR, we need to speed up the transcription of our archival data. And so we've started to use what we have now. And we've built a tool called Kaituhi. We've added automatic speech recognition into the loop to help our transcribers to transcribe our native speaker data. Now, the reason that it's so important for the native speaker data is because when we listen to second language learners of Te Reo Māori, it's quite different to the sound of a first language speaker or a native language speaker for that matter. And pronunciation is such an important part of the language acquisition, particularly for an Indigenous language that's been harmed. So we had a word error rate of 14%, and for us, we evaluated that as good enough to go, to use internally. Now, good enough is something that our transcribers and our kuia and kaumātua made a call on. But adapting the model to enhance our efforts to improve our data curation was a really important decision. And it's accelerated where we've got to now because we had a labeling problem. And so you can check out Kaituhi at kaituhi.nz. And Kaituhi is our automatic speech transcription kaupapa. I'll just check teihua. Okay, can I move quickly to this, Tim? Thank you. Ka pai. Kei te pai? Oh, okay, so I'm going to just throw in the news from today. Teihua, or whenever it was. Oh, hea tēnā, harako tēnā, tēnei. Okay. So we brought 8 GPUs from these NVIDIA things so that we could bring some services in-house. And the reason why we needed to bring services in-house was because it was costing us so much money to do our work, like so much, thousands of dollars a month. And we needed to be able to grow in-house services. So this converts Māori language so quickly. And it's in our happens in our supercomputer in Kaitaia.
Ngā take o te tai tokerau.
Can you see that?
Tēnā koutou katoa e te iwi whanui nau mai whakapiri mai ki ngā kawenga kaupapa kōrero o te wā. Atu i te reo Irirangi Māori o te Hiku o te ika e haere ake nei ko ngā take o te tai tokerau. He mea tautoko e nei kōrero e wātea me te māngai pāho.
So,
Kia ora mai tātou katoa.
So that's an example of it working in real life action. I'm going to go back to the clicking thing now, please. Tony, kia ora. And so if you want to sign up, you can sign up. We want to present that to the courts, judges, Māori Land Court. Are there people here in Wellington that could use a service like that? And we've all heard about by Māori for Māori. Well, this is also by Māori language speakers for everybody. We have a whole bunch of different ways of using it. We use it for archiving, and my particular area of attention is idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms or whakatauki and kiwaha. And so here you can tag and label things. I'm tagging hey ya there, And the example is, nā, koia tērā ko te kohatu, hei a pāu ai rātou I te tīmata I a rātou kāpura. And so that particular expression, hei a, is an expression that we kind of only hear, or I've only heard it anyway, in Te Aupōuri and Te Rarawa, but it's a natural example. So when learners or teachers want natural examples from kaumātua and kuia, we like to have a category of natural examples, which are quite different to staged or written examples, in so much as when people are actually just having a conversation, people change ideas halfway through a sentence and start a new idea. And so we have a bunch of different examples of how something is used. So, nā koia tērā ko te, and that is because that's the rock that was used to start their fires. So we use all these examples and we document them and we tag and label them so that we're not just thinking about data sets for natural language processing, we're also looking at data sets for natural language understanding. And that's because understanding the context of word use and idiomatic expression use in te reo Māori, it requires a very, very intelligent cultural perspective to be applied to the tagged parts of speech that you're working with. And another important area for us is the intergenerational transmission of sound, or the archaeology of sound. And the archaeology of sound and the transmission of sound recognizes that the taringa, or the ia, is a medium. And our life experiences as people influence the way that we digest information. And because we know that different worldviews or people might hold stereotypes about certain people or groups of people in the world, how can we influence the way that people digest information and make decisions? And so we started to work with our kuia and kaumātua in recognizing that the sound of home is often associated with the way that Māori language is pronounced, and the intonation, te piki me te heke o te reo, and lots of things like that. And so speaking native sound into our future was very much part of us learning more about what the intergenerational transmission of sound meant now and what it might mean in the future. So Māori language pronunciation, for us, that was such an important learning, particularly with the competition that I referred to earlier, because people wanted feedback. I want to talk to you, Peter Lucas, about what your kaimahi said to mere. You know what I mean? And what we found is feedback needs to be couched very carefully, because if people associate things or have trauma associated with something, we needed to take that into account. But still, what people were signaling is they wanted real-time pronunciation feedback, but the feedback needed to be couched in a certain way. So we hacked a deep speech model to measure pronunciation, and we started to tag and label pronunciation. And the reason for that is we needed data that took into account our phonetics, took into account vowel sounds and long vowel sounds, diphthongs where two vowels followed one another. For example, maunga versus maunga. Now, maunga, for example, we hear people do the pepeha. I don't know if I go to a lot of meetings in Wellington. Sometimes the first half an hour of it is people telling me their pepeha. And I'm going, so I got up at 4 a.m. to go to Kerikeri to catch a 6 a.m. flight to listen to this. And I was like, oh, heck. But what I'm trying to share is that people are making an effort. People are making an effort, but how do we encourage that effort? And so how do we encourage an experience where people can acquire a more native sound? And that native sound is sometimes associated with sounds that people don't naturally make in their mother tongue. And so we were taking that on board in the way that we developed an app called Rongo, and it's a pronunciation app that provides users with feedback on their pronunciation. Oh, now you can download Rongo. Does anyone know about Rongo? Okay, go to the App Store or the Google Store and download Rongo now. And it's a free app. It's for people to, as we say, move from the maunga to the maunga. And to get to that point, we needed to develop a platform for our internal kaimahi to tag and label pronunciation data. Aroha mai. For example, kaua e wehi ki te kōrero I o koutou whakaro. Don't be frightened to share your ideas, to share your thoughts. But then someone else might say, kaua e wehi ki te kaurero I o koutou whakaro. Do you know what I mean? And is that wrong? That's the question. Is that wrong? Because parts of that I found intelligence in. And if someone was able to transmit the idea that they were making an effort to convey, perhaps it wasn't completely wrong. So we had to make some quite philosophical, make time for philosophical debate. But what we do know is what we could do is benchmark it against our native speaker data. And so when we refer back to our kuia and kaumātua, we know that they say kaua, they don't say kaua. And so we wanted to benchmark back to the traditional sound. And that's what sits behind the Rongo app. And the Rongo app is for everybody to improve their Māori language pronunciation. And I talked a little bit about benchmarking. And the reason is because big tech is eroding marginalized languages. When I went on Google this morning, I wrote, kia ora wāhine mā, and it said, hello, my wife. Now, earlier I heard someone suggest or talk or raise an idea of getting AI to translate te reo Māori. Earlier in this conversation that we're having with one another today, I mentioned that tagged parts of speech and context is everything. And when we think about Indigenous language and Indigenous culture and the context that words, for example, in te reo Māori, sometimes one word has many different meanings. But I don't know where this comes from because I come from te Aupōuri and te Rarawa, and I know that kia ora wāhine mā doesn't mean hello, my wife. And kia ora tamariki mā, may the children be healthy. I don't know where they got this from because it doesn't mean that. And then I thought, oh, well, I'll change the punctuation. And maybe if I added some different punctuation, it might change the output. But instead it said, goodbye, my children. Now, in te reo Māori, we know that use of mā indicates plural. But kia ora means hello. I don't know where it means goodbye. Now, what I want to raise to our attention is also the Flores data set. Have you guys heard of that? Anyway, I won't get into a lot of detail. But anyway, the Flores data set is an open source data set and it's available for people to use. A few years back, we were inundated in iwi radio, in kohanga reo, and kura kaupapa. Our sister schools amongst the Kanaka Māori people of Hawaii were also approached by a group called Lionbridge. And Lionbridge was going to pay all of us, I think it was $45 an hour to read Māori language sentences to their computer so they could save our language, because we couldn't save it ourselves. And I thought, what the biggest slap in the face that was. When you think about all the efforts that have been combined to see a revival of te reo Māori. And this concerned me, because who's doing the quality assurance? And now we understand that perhaps there was a connection with other services that are being provided by big tech. We had our experts evaluate the data set, and the Māori data set was only 4 speakers. Our trained ear, by way of the pronunciation, we thought none of them were native, despite the paper claiming that they were native. Only 2 had reasonably good pronunciation. 2 had quite poor pronunciation in our assessment. And in one example, the audio quality was so poor that we were unable to make an assessment. Now, the thing about that Flores data set paper is usually scientific papers start off with where the data came from. They must have forgot that part, because it's unclear where the data comes from and what rights they had to use it. 1,300 hours of te reo Māori, 400 hours of Olelo Hawaii, and many other indigenous languages benchmarked on FLIRS. Now, if your quality data set is only 2 second language learner or poor pronunciation, and 2 even poorer, and then the policy is that as long as it's 50% right, doesn't even have to be 80%, not even 90%. It raised significant concerns and questions for us. Significant concerns and questions around what harm could this type of approach do to te reo Māori, knowing that without a digital future, our language doesn't have a future. Knowing that we have to get this right, we can't get it wrong. Knowing that you're only ever going to be as good as the quality that you are at least exposed to. So we wanted to at least share a whakaro of quality being extremely important. And so our biggest global impact to date has been around how we respect the data we use in data science. Much of the industry has no respect for data, let alone Māori data or Indigenous data. And we can't help but be reminded about Western societies and their disrespect for the environment. Certainly in this country, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And today we have the big climate change issues, climate adaptation plans being written up at the council, draft water plans, all as a result of the environment not being respected. I can't even start to imagine what the future will hold if we continue down a similar pathway with how we treat data in digital environments. And so like my key points have always been data sovereignty is important for Māori people. Data sovereignty is always going to be important for whānau hapu and iwi. Kaitiakitanga data licensing is only one tool. It's not the only tool. Respect for the data and how the data and the people who know the data are more important than the scientists. Much more important. Never forget, the haukainga, the kaumātua, the kuia, ngā reo o te kāinga have an important part to play in the digitisation of te reo Māori. And so we continue to do our work on Māori language ASR, and we've now developed a bilingual model for code switching, because we know that code switching is a very real thing in te reo Māori. I ti mata hau i taku whakaaro i roto i te reo Māori, ka tahi ka huria hau ki te reo Pākehā. And I start to follow the same idea. But what I'm doing is I'm now using a different language. And of course, in other countries, people do the same thing. But in Aotearoa, we are very monolingual. But we wanted to take into account the fact that whānau hapu and iwi code switch very naturally. And so we started to expand our data sets. And I want to recognise and mihi to all the different rōpū that have been part of this journey. And whilst we have our whare kōrero, which includes the 21 iwi radio stations, aroha mai, there's also the Quake Box. And the Quake Box is an important data set of people telling their stories associated with the horrific events that happened in Ōtautahi. Kōrero Māori, our competition, kaituhi, and the common voice. Papareo. I just want to quickly show a demo to you here. And so we have our data science project. We're working on developing a synthetic voice for Māori language voices for assistive technology for our non-speaking whānau. Teihua. Ka mihi ahau, oh, spelling mistake.
Ka mihi ahau ki a koutou e noho mai nei I tēnei rā.
And when we use like different punctuation, we notice that things change a little bit.
Ka mihi ahau ki a koutou e noho mai nei I tēnei rā.
So, and I'll just go back here. Thank you, Tim. And so that's an example of our text-to-speech. Now, our kaitia, I've only got 5 minutes, so I better kia horo. Kaitiakitanga license, that's basically an agreement between us and people or organisations that want to use our technology. And it's an agreement in relation to the use of our papareo tools. I better move faster. Now, the key drivers is really building a Māori language economy, advancing data science in Aotearoa, strengthening mana motuhake, preventing the mining of our mātauranga Māori for commercial gain. Because if anyone's going to gain commercially, I think it should be the people that had the language beaten out of their mouths in the first place. And so that sits very much behind the work that we do and the philosophy that we are part of. And building iwi capability and capacity is such an important part of this journey. Data acquisition aspirations consistent with the Kaitiakitanga license agreement include how we can work with one another, because it's not always just about the data that we're kaitiaki of. As you can see, some of the data that we work with has come from other places. But this is a framework, and we lay it out when we strategically make a decision about who we are going to work with, because sometimes it's just a straight no from them and from us. And that's because we wish to ensure that the sovereignty of the Māori data arising from the licensed software remains with Māori, and the benefits derived from these technologies is reinvested into the community's language revitalisation efforts. And that circles back to that other whakaaro. So our values and principles are the tuapapa of our kaitiakitanga license. And I just want to mention the Māori Data Sovereignty Network and those leaders in that space, because they have provided advice to us as we are practitioners. We are not academics. But what we did get working was Māori language speech to text and text to speech. So rangatiratanga, whakapapa, whanaungatanga, kotahitanga, manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga are all values that underpin the work that we do. And we prohibit certain uses. For example, we do not agree for our technologies to be used for surveillance of our people. We will not permit our APIs to be used for tracking our people. We will not permit our APIs to be used for discrimination or acts of unfairness against Māori people, persecution, unfairness, anything that is inconsistent with the values that were on the previous page. So it's very much in a memorandum of understanding, and parts of it, of course, are quite ordinary, but the part that is profound is that it's haukainga-led. And I think that we shouldn't forget about how important haukainga-led projects are. We were the first non-university group to be awarded a data science award by MB. But we weren't just the first a non-academic group. We were the first non-Pākehā group. And that was a huge ceiling that we broke. And we want to continue our work to ensure that we are an example for other communities like Kaitaia, that we often just hear about as the murder capital of New Zealand, or things like that. Because we need to change the narrative. And changing the narrative means policy makers, award decision makers need to understand that not everything good in science comes out of a university. So how might we license our data and tech? With our kaitiakitanga license. Check out te manararanga. Remember that the profits must be reinvested into the kaupapa. And data is land. Kia ora mai anō tātou.
Sorry, I did a university degree in linguistics, so my little brain is lighting up all over the place. We're going to have a Q&A. You can ask questions on Slido once again. The code is NDF23. Like I said, I'm a little linguistics nerd, so I want to start with, you mentioned in the section on pronunciation that different people have different pronunciations. I know that a major issue is that sort of over time the pronunciation will change as there's more and more influence.
Kei te mahi te, e mahi ana te mihi ni puluro ka pai.
It's probably more important that people can hear you than me.
Well, that's a question that people often ask, you know, evolution versus colonization. And I think it's important to recognize that our reo has been colonized. And how do we restore native sound the work that we've done to reclaim our lands. I talked about spectrum, our rights as Māori to be Māori. I think are important reflections for us to think about as we consider the impact that the dominant language, te reo Pākehā, has on pronunciation, and things like the penultimate rise. Because in the penultimate rise, we hear a question, but quite often it's a statement. So we know that in Eastern Polynesian languages, we find that everything goes down at the end. Ko Peter Lucas tōku ingoa, I whānau mai a hau I kaitāia, e noho ana hau I taipā I te taitoke rau. Ko Peter Lucas taku ingoa, e whānau mai a hau I kaitāia. You know, so I think we need to recognize that languages have culture, and in recognizing that the culture of te reo Māori is not a white culture, that it is a culture that is deeply rooted in the landscape and environment, and that it provides an opportunity to reconnect.
Some questions coming in on Slido. Thank you everyone for sending your questions. How can cultural institutions or people working in the culture sector either support your mahi or collaborate to use your mahi on data sovereignty?
Is this working? Oh, kapai. There's many ways that the sector can support this mahi, and I wouldn't call it our mahi like as an individual. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to many, many people. The way that we support the mahi is developing tools that people can use, and reminding ourselves that the taonga that we hold or are in possession of mean that we have to ask ourselves, is there a difference between owning something and something belonging to us? And that idea about ownership and belonging being two related but different things, I think will help us support the mahi that we must all do. Kia ora.
Thank you. Another question sort of related and adjacent is people asking if there's a pathway to improve the representation of te reo in third-party apps. So you mentioned some of the ways that other
with Whisper, Google Translate, or even apps like Duolingo. So, I mean, Whisper, Google Translate, apps like Duolingo, under a kaitiakitanga license, that's a really good question. I mean, from my perspective, just because you have Māori employees in a Pākehā organisation doesn't make that organisation kaupapa Māori. And I think that a lot of times what we see is organisations wearing something like a korowai, and after 5 o'clock they take it off. But the thing about kaupapa Māori is that korowai is always there. And you can't take that korowai off because that's a korowai aroha. And when we think about the korowai aroha, we're reminded of a very, very famous proverb from Āpere Mataonui, who came from Taitokerau. And he says, kei te hara mai tētahi taniwha, o nā niho he hiriwa me te koura. Ko tana kai he whenua. There's a monster coming, and its teeth are silver and gold, and it eats land. And that was one of his prophecies. And I think when we look back to how our ancestors saw different parts in our histories, how do we work in these new circumstances? And is it right for organisations, let's not pretend that AI is a thing whānau. a new word for corporations. AI doesn't think like we do. AI doesn't learn like we do. AI is a new way to make money. And what as fast as we need to realize that the answer is not in non-Indigenous groups leading transformative change for Indigenous people. Kia ora. Okay, the next one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to apologise for the technical difficulties.
It's all right.
The key takeaway here is that Te Papa is silencing Māori voices. I think that,
Different dialects. So different dialects is a really good question. And different dialects provides an opportunity for transfer learning. If we look at the phonetical differences between different Māori language dialects, perhaps there's an opportunity there for us to encourage some exploration of transfer learning. And if we can do that, imagine what sort of story we could tell about the journeys, the linguistic story that can tell our journey from Hawaii. Because if we can do transfer learning with our own Māori language dialects, perhaps we can look at some transfer learning with our related languages, which we understand to be Olelo Hawaii, Te Reo Māori o ngā kuki Irirangi, Tahitian, Samoan, Tongan, Niuean. Those languages are all related to our language as well.
Can I just jump off that? Another question I have about that is register sort of different levels of formality. Because something that I found in learning a language that I'll learn it from a book and then I'll go to a country and someone will say, like, why are you talking like a 70-year-old woman? Is there, what sort of flexibility or plasticity is there in language recognition? Yeah.
Well, our model works good with young people. It works excellent with Māori language broadcasters. But if it was to be exposed to a bunch of data from native speakers from Te Kao, for example, it doesn't work as well. And so we're concentrating on enhancing our tagged and labeled collection of native speakers. Because when you ask somebody, who do you want to sound like when you speak Māori? They often pick someone that represents where they come from. And that's often somebody that they associate with their whānau hapu and iwi. And sometimes that person is an older person. It sometimes is an older person that has been less colonized in the and has been, I guess, their command of the language hasn't been diminished so much by the colonization and white assimilation process. So there's a lot to unpack in all that, because whānau hapu and iwi have a range of different experiences with the language learning journey. And I think if we recognise that that's the benchmark, kuia and kaumātua and native speakers, it helps us recognise the difference of learning a language that has been outlawed and has been associated with a lot of negative stereotypes, and just taking all that on board in the way that we work with the stuff. I hope that sort of explains at least somewhat of an idea.
Absolutely. I think we're out of time, but I just want to say thank you very much. I'm so grateful for your work on this whole umbrella of different apps and services. And speaking of, we have a present for you. It's from NDF.
I hope it's not wine.
No, it is in fact an NDF umbrella.
I love it.
I love umbrellas.
Suitable for all kinds of Wellington weather. Yours is available
kia ora.
at Oceania for a small fee. Everyone, please give a huge round of applause for Peter Lucas Jones.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you so much.